Hello, and welcome back to the Chronicles of Narnia. Today we're reading Chapter 2 in The Magician's Nephew, entitled Digory and His Uncle. Fair warning, I might have forgotten what voices I've done, so it might not be the same. But, yes. Chapter 2, Digory and His Uncle. It was so sudden and so horribly unlike anything that had ever happened to Digory, even in a nightmare, that he let out a scream. Instantly, Uncle Andrew's hand went over his mouth.
"None of that,"
he hissed in Digory's ear.
"If you start making a noise, your mother'll hear it, and you know what a fright might do to her."
As Digory said afterwards, the horrible meanness of getting a chap in that way almost made him sick, but of course he did not scream again.
"That's better,"
said Uncle Andrew.
"Perhaps you couldn't help it. It is a shock when you first see someone vanish. Why, it even gave me a turn when the guinea pig did it the other night."
"What was it that you yelled?" asked Digory.
"Oh, you heard that, didn't you? I hope you haven't been spying on me."
"No, I haven't," said Digory indignantly. But what's happened to Polly?"
"Congratulate me, my dear boy,"
said Uncle Andrew, rubbing his hands.
"My experiment was a success. The little girl's gone, vanished, right out of the world."
"What have you done to her?"
"Sent her to another place."
"What do you mean?" asked Digory. Uncle Andrew sat down and said,
"Well, I'll tell you about it. Have you ever heard of old Miss Leafy?"
"Wasn't she a great aunt or something?" said Digory.
"Not exactly,"
said Uncle Andrew.
"She was my godmother. That's her there on the wall."
Digory looked and saw a faded photograph. It showed the face of an old woman in a bonnet, and he could now remember that he had once seen a photo of that same face in an old drawer at home in the country. He had asked his mother who it was, and Mother had not seemed to want to talk about the subject much. It was not at all a nice face. Digory thought, though of course with those early photographs one could never really tell. Wasn't there something wrong with her, Uncle Andrew?" he asked.
"Well,"
said Uncle Andrew with a chuckle,
"it depends what you call wrong. People are so narrow-minded. She certainly got very queer in later life, did very unwise things. That's why they shut her up."
"In an asylum, do you mean?"
"Oh, no,"
said Uncle Andrew in a shocked voice.
"Nothing of that sort. Only in prison."
"I say," said Digory, "what has she done?"
"Ah, poor woman,"
said Uncle Andrew.
"She'd been very unwise. There were a good many different things. We needn't go into all of that. She was always very kind to me."
"But look here, what has all that got to do with Polly? I do wish you'd—"
"All in good time, my boy,"
said Uncle Andrew.
"They let old Miss Leafy out before she died, and I was one of the very few people whom she would be allowed to see in her last illness. She'd got to dislike ordinary, ignorant people, you understand. I do myself. But she and I were interested in the same sort of things. It was only a few days before her death that she told me to go to an old bureau in her house and open a secret drawer and bring her little box that I would find there. The moment I picked up that box, I could tell by the pricking in my fingers that I held some great secret in my hands. She gave it to me, and she made me promise that as soon as she was dead, I would burn it up, unopened, with certain ceremonies. That promise I did not keep.
Well then, it was jolly rotten of you, said Digory.
Rotten?
Said Uncle Andrew with a puzzled look.
Oh, I see. You mean that little boys ought to keep their promises. Very true. Most right and proper, I'm sure. And I'm very glad you have been taught to do it. But of course, you must understand that rules of sort, however excellent they may be for little boys and servants and women, and even people in general, can't possibly be expected to apply to profound students and great thinkers and sages. No, Digory. Men like me, who possesses hidden wisdom, are freed from common rules, just as we were cut off from common pleasures. Ours, my boy, is a high and lonely destiny.
As he said this, he sighed and looked so grave and noble and mysterious that for a second Digory really thought that what he was saying was something rather fine. But then he remembered the ugly look he had seen on his uncle's face the moment before Polly had vanished, and all at once he saw through Uncle Andrew's grand words. All it means is that he thinks he can do anything he likes and get away with what he wants, he said to himself.
Of course,
said Uncle Andrew.
I didn't dare to open the box for a long time, for I knew it might contain something highly dangerous, for my godmother was a very remarkable woman. The truth is, she was one of the last mortals in the country who had fairy blood in her. She said that there had been 2 others in her time. One was a duchess and the other a charwoman. In fact, Digory, you are now talking to the last man, possibly, who really had a fairy godmother. There! That'll be something for you to remember when you're an old man yourself.
I bet she was a bad fairy, thought Digory, and added out loud, but what about Polly?
How you do harp on that,
said Uncle Andrew.
As if that was what mattered. My first task was, of course, to study the box itself. It was very ancient, and I knew enough even then to know that it wasn't Greek, or Old Egyptian, or Babylonian, or Hilti, or Chinese. It was older than any of those nations. Ah, this was a great day when I at last found out the truth. The box was Atlantean. It came from the lost islands of Atlantis. That meant it was centuries older than any of the Stone Age things they dig up in Europe. And it wasn't a rough, crude thing like them either, for in the very dawn of time, Atlantis was already a great city with palaces and temples and learned men.
He paused for a moment, as if he expected Digory to say something. But Digory was disliking his uncle more every minute, so he said nothing.
Meanwhile, I was learning a good deal in other ways. It wouldn't be proper to explain them to a child, about magic in general. That meant that I came to have a fair idea what sort of things might be in that box. By various tests, I narrowed down the possibilities. I had to get to know some devilish queer people, and go through some very disagreeable experiences. That was what turned my head grey. One doesn't become a magician for nothing. My health broke down in the end, but I got much better. And at last, I actually knew.
Although there was not really the least chance of anyone overhearing them, he leaned forward and almost whispered as he said,
The Atlantean box contained something that had been brought from another world, when our world was only just beginning.
What? Asked Digory, who was now interested in spite of himself.
Only dust,
said Andrew.
Fine, dry dust. Nothing much to look at. Not much to show for a lifetime of toil, you might say. But when I looked at that dust, I took jolly good care not to touch it, and thought that every grain in there had been in another world. I don't mean another planet, you know. They're part of our world, and you could get to them if you went far enough. But really, another world, another nature, another universe. somewhere you would never reach, even if you travelled through space of this universe forever and ever. A world that could only be reached by magic. Well, here Uncle Andrew rubbed his hands until his knuckles cracked like fireworks. I knew that if only you could get into the right form, that dust would draw you back to the place it had came from. But the difficulty was to get it into the right form. My earlier experiments were failures. I tried them on guinea pigs. Some of them only died. Some of them exploded like little bombs.
It was a jolly cruel thing to do, said Diggory, who once had a guinea pig of his own.
How do you keep getting off the point?
Said Uncle Andrew.
That's what the creatures were for. I bought them myself. Let me see, where was I? Ah, yes. At last I succeeded in making the rings, the yellow rings, but now a new difficulty arose. I was pretty sure that a yellow ring would send a creature that touched it into the other place. But what would be the good of that if I couldn't get them back to tell me what they'd found there?
And what about them? Said Diggory. A nice mess they'd be in if they couldn't get back.
You will keep on looking at everything from the wrong point of view,
said Uncle Andrew with a look of impatience.
Can't you understand that the thing is a great experiment? The whole point of sending anyone to the other place is so I can find out what it's like.
Well, why didn't you go there yourself then? Diggory had hardly ever seen someone look so surprised and offended as his uncle did in that simple question.
Me? Me?
He exclaimed.
The boy must be mad! A man of my time and at my state of health to risk the shock and the dangers of being flung suddenly into a different universe? I've never heard anything so preposterous in my life. Do you realise what you're saying? Think what another world means. You might mean anything. Anything.
And I suppose you've sent Polly into it then, said Diggory. His cheeks were flaming with anger now. And all I can say, even if you are my uncle, is that you behaved like a coward, sending a girl into a place where you're afraid to go yourself.
Silence, sir,
said Uncle Andrew, bringing his hand down on the table.
I will not be talked to like that by a little dirty schoolboy. You don't understand. I am the great scholar, the magician, the adept who is doing the experiment. Of course I need subjects to do it on. Bless my soul, you'll be telling me next that I ought to have asked the guinea pigs permission before I used them. No great wisdom can be reached without sacrifice, but the idea of my going myself, it's ridiculous. It's like asking a general to fight a common soldier. Supposing I got killed, what would become of my life's work?
Oh, do stop jawing. Are you going to bring Polly back?
Well, I was going to tell you when you rudely interrupted me that I did at last find a way of doing the return journey. The green rings you draw back.
But Polly hasn't got a green ring.
No,
said Uncle Andrew with a crude smile. Then she can't get back, shouted Diggory. And it's exactly the same as if you'd murdered her.
She can get back if someone else will go after her wearing a yellow ring himself and taking 2 green rings, one to bring himself back and one to bring her back.
And now, of course, Diggory saw the trap in which he was caught, and he stared at Uncle Andrew, saying nothing, his mouth wide open. His cheeks had gone very pale.
I hope,
said Uncle Andrew, presently in a high and mighty voice, just as if he were a perfect uncle who had given one a handsome tip and some good advice.
I hope, Diggory, you are not given to showing the white feather. I should be very sorry to think that any one of our family had not enough honour and chivalry to get to the aid of, a lady in distress.
Oh, shut up, said Diggory. If you had any honour and all like that, you'd be going yourself. But I know you won't. All right, I see I've got to go. But you are a beast, and I suppose you planned the whole thing so that she'd go without knowing it, and then I'd have to go after her. Of course, said Uncle Andrew with a hateful smile. Very well, I'll go. But there's one thing I jolly well mean to say. I didn't believe in magic till today, and I see now it's real. Well, if it is, I suppose, all like the old fairy tales, or if it's more or less true, and you're simply a wicked, cruel magician like the ones in the stories. Well, I've never read a story in which people were that sort aren't put out in the end, and I bet you will be, and serves you right. Of all the things Digory had said, this was the first thing to hit home. Uncle Andrew started, then there came over his face a look of such horror that, beast though he was, you could almost feel sorry for him. But a second later, he smoothed it all away, and with a rather forced laugh.
Well, I suppose that it is a natural thing for a child to think, brought up amongst women as you have been. Old wives' tales, eh? I don't think you need to worry about my danger, Digory. Wouldn't it be better to worry about the danger of your little friend? She's been gone some time. If there are any dangers over there, well, it would be a pity to arrive a moment too late.
A lot you care, said Digory fiercely, but I'm sick of this jaw. What have I got to do?
You really must learn to control that temper of yours, my boy,
said Uncle Andrew coolly.
Otherwise you'll grow up like your Aunt Letty. Now, attend to me.
He got up, put on a pair of gloves, and walked over to the tray of rings.
They only work if they're actually touching your skin. Wearing gloves, I can pick them up like this, and nothing happens. If you carried one in your pocket, nothing would happen. But of course, you'd have to be careful not to put your hand in your pocket, or you'd touch it by accident. The moment you touch a yellow ring, you'll vanish out of this world. When you are in the other place, I expect, of course, this hasn't been tested yet, but I expect that the moment you touch a green ring, you will vanish out of that world, and I expect reappear in this. Now, I take the 2 green rings and drop them into your right pocket. Remember, very carefully which pocket the greens are in. G for green and R for right. G-R, you see, which are the first 2 letters of green. One for you and one for the little girl. And now you pick up a yellow one for yourself. I should put it on your finger, if I were you. There'll be less chance of dropping it.
Digory had almost picked up the yellow ring when suddenly he checked himself. Look here, he said. What about Mother? Supposing she asks where I am.
The sooner you go, the sooner you'll be back,
said Uncle Andrew cheerfully. But you don't really know whether I can get back. Uncle Andrew shrugged his shoulders, walked across to the door and unlocked it, threw it open and said,
Oh, very well then, just as you please. Go down and have your dinner. Leave the little girl to be eaten by wild animals, or drowned, or starved in the other world, or lost there for good. If that's what you prefer, it's all one to me. Perhaps before tea time you'd better drop off to Miss Plummer and explain that she'll never see her daughter again, because you were afraid to put on a ring.
By gum! Don't I just wish I were big enough to punch you in your head? Then he buttoned up his coat, took a big deep breath, and picked up the ring. And he thought then, as he always thought afterwards too, that he could not decently have done anything else. And that is the end of chapter 2. Join us in a few days where we will read chapter 3, The Bell and the Hammer. Good night.